Good afternoon, and thank you for joining SPEC Innovation's webinar special, a look into the new features in Innoslate. My name is Elizabeth Steiner, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. Today, you will be hearing from our president and founder, Dr. Stephen Dam, and the director of software, Chris Ritter. But first, let's go over some quick housekeeping. During the presentation, feel free to send us questions using the panel on the right. We will get those questions answered in the question and answer part of the webinar. You can also interact with us on LinkedIn through the Innoslate user group or through Twitter using the handle @Innoslate. The webinar is being recorded and we will make it available to you after the live presentation, so please be sure to keep an eye out for it in your inbox. Now I would like to introduce you to our first presenter, Dr. Steve Dam. He'll be sharing with you his vision for Innoslate and how the upcoming features fit with his vision. Dr. Dam has been involved with research experiments, operations analysis, software development, systems engineering, and training for more than 40 years. He has also received an Expert Systems Engineering Professional Certification from INCOSE. He continues to apply systems engineering techniques to various DoD, DOE, and commercial projects. Feel free to send Dr. Dam any questions through the LinkedIn user group or send him an email to stephen.dam@specinnovations.com.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Welcome, everyone, to our first webinar special. We live in the information age. Innoslate was developed to help anyone who needs to deal with large amounts of data. We want to understand what the data means, transforming it into information. We want to take this information and use it to make decisions for what to buy, what to build, how to organize, how to do our work, and how to respond to needs. In being able to make better decisions and capturing those decisions so we don't forget them, we can improve customers, societies, and our own lives. These improvements in people's lives will lead to a better standard of living for everyone. As many of you know, Innoslate was originally built for internal use as a first priority. We needed a tool that could capture data in a fast and cost-effective way. We needed a tool that could help us be more productive and increase our value to society. Innoslate is that tool. Everyone who transforms data into information needs a tool like Innoslate. I want to see Innoslate continue towards that vision. We have always found the best way to do this was through the lifecycle modeling language. We continue to believe this is true. LML allows us to perform model-based systems engineering and capture data in a simpler and faster way than ever before. I highly encourage people to learn LML. However, we have found that there are those who have worked with SysML for years or are required to use SysML for their projects and need another solution. So the newest update, we've added SysML support. Now you can represent your model using all 9 SysML diagrams with bidirectional LML translation. For example, you can now develop a sequence diagram, and Innoslate will automatically generate the SysML activity diagram and the LML action diagram. Along with this additional SysML support, we've added advanced search support to make the process of finding your entities even faster and easier. You will be able to import and export more complex documents as well. Another major update is the software development kit. This new feature will allow you to develop custom reports in Java or Jasper reports. All these new features work toward a common goal to capture the full life cycle while saving our resources and benefiting the systems engineering community and society as a whole. I'm going to let Christopher Ritter, our Director of Software Development, explain the technical details of these new features. He's led a major part of the development of Innoslate and knows the tool inside and out. Chris?
Thanks, Dr. Dam. So as Dr. Dam already said, we've added a lot of new and exciting features: SysML support, new import-export, advanced search engine, and even the software development kit. I'll go into the specifics of each of these new features, but first I'd like to go over our agenda. Dr. Dam went over the vision. I will discuss each of the new features, then go into a live tool presentation. After that, Dr. Dan will join back with us and will answer any of your questions. So don't forget to ask your questions throughout the presentation. So today we're going to be talking about SysML support, the new import-export, our advanced search engine, the new software development kit, and then we're going to run a live tool demonstration, followed by your questions and answers. So we have 9 new SysML diagrams in Innoslate with bidirectional translation from SysML to LML. So for example, you can draw a sequence diagram that will automatically generate a SysML activity diagram. This activity diagram will automatically generate the proper parallel branches and actions needed. All you have to do is go in and name the object nodes to the correct names, and then you will have a really nice looking activity diagram out of the box just by building a sequence diagram. And then you can add whatever constructs you want, like an OR, a fork join, and a loop, and further specify your functional model. In real time, the LML action diagram will be updated with all this information. So as you build your SysML diagrams, you can rest in confidence that the LML model is being updated, and vice versa. So if you want to use LML to build your model, as you've probably been doing in Innoslate, you can continue to do so, and then if you need to give a SysML diagram to your customer, you can just open the SysML activity diagram and then download the PNG and send it to your customer. So it's a very powerful way to visualize both languages simultaneously. The use case diagram has been in Innoslate for the past few versions, but we're putting it here again to make sure everyone remembers it's there. It shows use cases and their relation to the performers. You can specify use cases very easily with the use case diagram, and it's just drag drop as all the other diagrams are. The state machine diagram is brand new, and it's a great way to obviously represent states and nodes. So you can use the state machine diagram, and it uses states, which are characteristics in the LML schema, and transitions, which are actions. So we're using existing information that was already in the ontology, and actually one thing that we should mention is SysML support for Innoslate has been planned since before version 1. So we had a plan to do this for a long time. So there were actually very few schema changes made to Innoslate to make this update happen. So you can represent all your functional behavior as now an activity diagram, a use case diagram, a sequence diagram, or state machine diagram, in addition to the LML diagrams that we already provide. So on the structure diagram side, we have 4 all-new diagrams. The internal block diagram, which is brand new in Innoslate, but looks somewhat similar to an LML asset diagram. And that's because they represent the same information. The blocks are represented as assets. Their connections are represented as conduits, just as in the LML asset diagram. So if I produce an internal block diagram, I'll automatically get an asset diagram. And that's because the same relationships and classes are used. In the internal block diagram, we support all the SysML features like ports, port directionality, connector directionality, and pretty much anything else you would expect to use. We also now have the new parametric diagram. So the parametric diagram is a great way to show complex equations right within Innoslate. So you can put your equation right in with the stricter equation format, and you can map all your variables together so you can represent complex equations right in Innoslate. And we've added a new class to the Innoslate schema called equation to capture this information. The package diagram allows you to display packages and their relationships between each other. So similar in some ways to the LML spider diagram, and you can put all of these SysML relationships you'd expect in a regular package diagram. We also now have the block definition diagram, which is similar in a lot of ways to the spider diagram and like a hierarchy chart hybrid. So for those of you that are familiar with LML, it's sort of like a hierarchy chart with spider diagram mashed together. And it allows showing blocks or assets and entities and their relationships to each other. So you can kind of see all of your asset blocks in a hierarchy and then see their relationships to other things. And this is valid to the SysML specification, so you can see everything, and you can rest in confidence that everything we've done in Innoslate is to make sure that we are meeting the specification for SysML. And inside the blocks of the block definition diagram, you can put things like constraints, values, operations, and the flow ports from the internal block diagram. We also now have the SysML requirement diagram. The requirement diagram is used to display requirements as a visual model. The diagram shows requirements and the relationships to other model entities. So similar to the block definition diagram, your requirements will be displayed in a hierarchy, and then you'll see the relationship to other entities in your model. So for example, in the requirement diagram on the screen, you can see the action open door and close door is satisfying the requirement that the robot shall open and close the door. So it's a powerful way to kind of see your requirements in a hierarchy with the relationships to other entities. But really what is most powerful about the requirement diagram in Innoslate is its use because it's based on this LML schema. And so you can build your requirements document either in the requirements view, as you've probably been doing, or you can use the requirement diagram, and both will be updated simultaneously. So it's a very powerful way. You can have your modeling experts approach the project as a model, and users that are more comfortable with the document-centric view use requirements view, and they can all work collaboratively together at the same time. So it's really powerful in that as different people that are comfortable with different things can approach the model differently, all while updating the same information. So if you're also more comfortable with the LML hierarchy chart, some of our users can be using the hierarchy chart, some of our users can be using the requirement diagram, and some can be using the requirements view, and that's okay. And all the collaboration notifications work simultaneously so that we make sure you know where everybody is and what everybody's doing. As Steve mentioned, we also have a new Microsoft Word importer. It now walks you through each step to make the import process a lot easier and less error-prone. We support simple lists, so just like 1, 2, 3, and more complex lists, which are called multi-level lists. So in Word, you can do documents that go 1.a.1. We now support parsing those types of lists. We support most default Word list types now, so you can use a lot of the default Word list types and know that those will parse into Innoslate, and we also support a few more that are common formats we've seen throughout the Department of Defense and other agencies. We do not require headings, so a lot of our competition requires that all of your headings are formatted properly for the document to import. We don't require headings, so you can import a lot of different documents, and often you'll find in the industry you're not going to find documents that have all the headings specified. So in this case, it just makes it a lot easier and a lot less manual to get documents in Innoslate. We can parse documents and test the documents like the Department of Defense memorandums. So almost all DoD memorandums have a very similar format, and we've tested with many of those memos successfully. So now you can rest in confidence that you can import those memos right into Innoslate and then trace them to your model without having to manually parse those documents. And we now support parsing into any class. So prior to this version, we only supported parsing into statement and requirement. Today, we now support parsing into actions and assets and any LML class you define or that's already there. The Excel importer has also been updated anew in Innoslate. We now support importing into all Innoslate attribute types. So we can import durations, distributions, so we can import like a normal distribution or a beta distribution. We support importing geolocation data, dates. You can now also, likewise with the Word importer, you can import it into any class. So you can have an Excel document with actions and import that right into Innoslate. So it's just a very powerful way to get data into Innoslate. On the export side, we have a host of new export options as well. So now within database view, whatever you have selected, so for example, if I select an action with an activity label, I can now export that directly to CSV or XML. So I can export piecemeal my model to an Excel spreadsheet or to XML to import into another document or to a different piece of software that supports the Innoslate schema. The requirements view also has the ability to do this. So you can export your requirements document directly to CSV or XML. Another new export option is all the diagrams now have SVG export. And this is really great because now you can take your diagram to SVG, and if you're doing something like a textbook, it makes it so you can rest in confidence that that drawing is going to be a vector and print really nicely for a print graphic. And also, you can take it into tools like Adobe Illustrator and Glyphy and do more post-processing on the diagram without having to redraw it. So it's a really powerful way. You can go right into Adobe Illustrator and edit the diagram right there, and then do more fancy things as far as visualizations go. You can give it to your graphic artists. It's just a great way to do fancy things with your diagrams. We now have import-export round-trip with Excel. So we mentioned that we now have Excel export and Excel import, and you can round-trip both of them. So you can export to CSV right from database view or requirements view, then take that CSV and open it in Excel, change the number, the name, add attribute values for geolocation, duration distributions, etc., and then re-import those changes right back into Innoslate. So this is really a great way to give data to people who are not experts at modeling and not familiar with Innoslate, and then let them give their input. For example, I could export cost, and then let someone who's an expert at cost fill in the correct values and then import it right back into Innoslate. So it's a powerful way to share data from Innoslate without having to be in Innoslate. So another new feature we have is the advanced search engine. We now support complex Boolean equations. So we can now search for things like is labelless and not an orphan. And that will find entities that have no label and are not an orphan. And an orphan is an entity that has no relationships. So a lot of our customers are currently having problems, right, where you have an entity that kind of hangs out with no relationships, right? And that either means that it's an entity that needs to be further defined, or it's an entity that was maybe created by mistake or needs to be deleted. So this is a great way to find entities that you may want to delete. So on our complex operations, we now support not, or, and. We've supported or and for a while, and we now added support for not. So not's a very powerful way to do new queries. We also support quoted terms. So you can search for things like SPEC innovations in quotes, and that will find the term SPEC innovations just like you would with Google search. We support stemming operations. So what that means is you can search for common variations of the word. So you can search for things like, you know, in part of the word like ing or EER will be cut off and will stem the root of the word, and you can search for words that are very similar to the root word. So it's a very powerful way that you don't have to know the exact search string that you're looking for. So along with the new searches, we now support number wildcards, and that's one of my personal favorite new features. So you can do things like number : a.4. And that will find any entity that starts with a.4. So that will find, that's a great way if you're in the entity view to maybe make a relationship to a whole bunch of requirements all at once, or a whole bunch of actions all at once. It's a very much faster way to do things than you have been in the past. We support searching for diagrams, so you can search for things like diagram : LML_action, and that will find for you all your action diagrams. So right from within the search, you can search for any of your diagram types and know what entities you define diagrams for. We also support attribute searching, so you can do things like equality, greater than, and less than. So in this example, attribute.duration less than 1 will find any action where its duration is less than 1 hour. For duration, our base unit is hours. And so it's a very powerful way to do new queries. We also support a number of other query options like has file, which will find you any artifact that has a file attached, or has image, which will find you any entity that has an image attached. You could do things like is following. So in version 3, we added support for the ability to follow entities, and now you can find out which ones you're following. Or you could do not is following, right, and find out what entities you're not following. You can do things like is leaf, which will find you entities that are at the bottom of your hierarchy. The orphan, which I mentioned before, which finds you entities that have no relationships. The is root, which will find you entities that are at the top of a hierarchy. And then, of course, we also support label and class queries like we have in the past. And a new query type we've also added is quality score. So you can also search for quality score, right, where quality score is less than 33. And you can find all your requirements that have a quality score that's less than 33%. So our software development kit is brand new and has actually been used by our company and a lot of other companies for the past 6 months or so. We actually use it internally for testing Innoslate. So we use it to run a lot of our automated tests are actually using the SDK already. And a lot of our customers are already using the SDK. So it's already been well used in the industry, and today we're publicly announcing its availability. We allow querying any Innoslate project database all the way back to Innoslate version 2. You can write data back to the Innoslate database, so you can write entity information back, you can add relationships. It's a very powerful, all-encompassing SDK that can do almost everything the user interface can do. So it's really, really powerful. And we even allow rendering diagrams, so you can use what we call the diagram service, and you can have Innoslate automatically render for you diagrams for your reports and for integrating into other tools. So it's very, very powerful. So some use cases for the SDK, and some of these are things we've already done ourselves or some of our customers have done, and some of these are things that you may want to do yourself. So you can now do custom advanced reports, which you can export to a variety of formats using commercial off-the-shelf tools like Apache POI, which can export to Word, Excel, or PowerPoint very easily, or you can do advanced charts like with JFreeChart or whatever library you want. You can build custom integrations into third-party tools. You can do custom data analytics of Innoslate projects. You can build your own custom import or export with proprietary formats. So if you have your own internal formats or there's a tool that we don't currently support, you can use the SDK to build support for importing or exporting that information. You can also now automate a lot of your tasks that used to be manual with a bulk change script. So this is something we've done a lot internally for SPEC Innovations. As we've always said, we use our own tool a lot. And so sometimes there's a lot of things you do that are very manual, but it's something that it's not very specific to your own use case and not something that's generalizable. So you can now build a script to do that and automate that process. So it'll save you hours and hours of time to build things that were before a manual process. And some of the new features today in Innoslate, like the new import, actually started as a script that we wrote for ourselves to do some advanced things. We also now support custom model heuristics to assess model maturity. So you can use the SDK to add new model maturity checks, right? We already have a lot of model maturity checks built into Innoslate, but if there's new ones that you need for your specific project, then you can now build those in with the SDK. And we've actually done that ourselves for some of our customers so that they can have model maturity heuristics that are very specific to their use cases. JasperSoft Studio is a reports commercial off-the-shelf tool. It's free and open source that can be used by anyone. And we now have an Innoslate driver available for Jasper Reports. So Jasper Reports is a what you see is what you get reporting tool. So you can just drag over whatever you want to put in your report. So if I want to add a field or a logo or stylize the report however I want, I can build some very nice looking custom reports right within JasperSoft Studio and then use the Innoslate driver to query data out of Innoslate. And Jasper has a lot of different options for export. You can export directly to PDF, RTF, XML, Excel, CSV, HTML, text, DocX, OpenOffice. It even supports PowerPoint. I mean, it's a very powerful report editor, and it's easy to use with drag drop. So there's now two options for custom reports for all of our customers. You can either use the Java SDK for a more powerful report, or you can use Jasper Studio, where you'll be able to just drag drop create your reports. So now that it's time to show you all the new features in a live tool demonstration, let me switch over to the tool and we'll go through each of the new features. So first I'm going to go to Microsoft Word, where I have a document with robot requirements that I pre-created. I'm just going to copy those requirements. And then I'm going to go into the new import analyzer. So first we're going to want to pick our number format. So here we have lots of different options for number formats, right? The simple formats that I mentioned before. So that's just a simple list, right? If I have 1, 2, 3, or Roman numerals, or letters, or any different types of variations on that format. I could also pick a custom format. So if your format doesn't show up on this list, you could define your own custom format to import. Then we also support most of the formats you can find in Word and a couple others. So you can now click the format that your document is, and we know if we look back at our Word document, it's 1.a.parentheses1. So that's the format we're going to want. So we're going to click on that format, and then we're going to click Next. Now we're just going to paste our document in, and then we're going to click Next again. And this is going to generate a preview of our requirements document. And here we can see what import analyzer found before we save it. So we found a total of 28 entities. One, of course, is the document itself, and 27 are requirements. So I can look through here and make sure this is what I expected it to do. And this is what I expected it to do, so I'll go ahead and click Save. And this is going to build for us a requirements document in real time. So you go, that was really fast. And there's all my requirements right in my requirements document directly from Word. And what was special about that import, right, there were no headings, if you remember, on that document, right? There was, the numbering format was not 1.1.1, right? It was a relatively speaking complex format that most tools can't parse automatically. So that's now something that's just that easy in Innoslate. So very powerful new feature. So let's go ahead and start on our model. Let's create a new action entity, and we'll call it Door Assistance. And then we'll open up the sequence diagram. And now you can see the sequence diagram has two different modes to choose from. We have sequence mode, which is our most flexible option, and the option probably many of you are used to. This is the mode that the sequence diagram today in Innoslate defaults to, and the only mode we usually recommend most people use in the old version of Innoslate. It's our most flexible option and creates sequence diagrams that generate purely sequential activity diagrams, right? So it's going to generate for you a very predictable activity diagram, but it isn't entirely interesting, right? It's going to at least keep your sequence diagram and activity diagram in sync, but it's not really the activity diagram you want, right? Everybody wants those parallel swim lanes on their activity diagrams, right? And right now, we're not generating that for you automatically until today. So today we're introducing parallel mode. This is by far our most powerful option of the sequence diagram, and that will create sequence diagrams for you automatically that generate parallel swim lanes for each lifeline in the action and activity diagrams. The actions that generate the input-outputs are used as the messages instead. So in the other sequence diagram, we use the input-output names as the message names. In this one, we're going to use the action names. So they work very differently, and there are use cases for both diagrams. but we recommend you check out the new parallel mode. It's very powerful. So let's go ahead to a sequence diagram that I already built. So here we'll look at this example, and I have 4 lifelines, right? I have the door, the robot, the user, and the visitor. The visitor is going to notify a presence to the robot. Then the robot is going to prompt for the activity of the user. The user is then going to command the robot to actually answer the door for us. And then the robot's going to request the door to open. The door is going to say it opened and then provide an entry invitation to the visitor. And then the visitor is going to enter, right? And then the door will close, and that's the end of our model, right? So a very simple example of maybe a robot doing a automated task like this. So then if I go in and I open the activity diagram, you can see automatically Innoslate is keeping the 2 in sync. So this diagram, all I've done is I've gone and I named these object nodes the correct names. The rest was automatically created for us from the tool. So a very powerful way to get an activity diagram without having to do a lot of work. And this is the new activity diagram in Innoslate, and you can see we're representing in all the LML constructs as you would normally expect while preserving the LML ontology. So if I flip to the action diagram, you can see the action diagram is also being created, right, in real time. So if I go to the activity diagram again, we'll look at one with a little bit more advanced constructs. So if I click on the decomposition symbol for SysML, you can now see the decomposition diagram, which has a loop and an OR in SysML, which I could, of course, also, once again, flip to the action diagram in Innoslate and see how that would look like in the action diagram. So really powerful, right? In real time, think of all the diagrams you're going to get. You could produce a sequence diagram. You're going to get a SysML activity diagram. You're going to get an LML action diagram. You're going to get all the diagrams you're used to getting from LML, right? So you're going to get things like a hierarchy chart automatically. You're going to get things like a spider diagram automatically, all out of the tool. So very powerful way to visualize your information while at the same time updating the same model that you've used to been updating for the last 2 or 3 years with Innoslate, right? So very, very powerful. All works with the simulator, so I can go and I can simulate this diagram, right, just as like I used to. So all the SysML diagrams are also simulatable, all the SysML activity diagrams are also simulatable just like the action diagram. So a very powerful way to represent functional information. And going along with functional information, we also now have the state machine diagram. And let's look at the state machine diagram that we have here. So we have 3 states. We have an open state, a closed state, and a locked state. And those states are represented as characteristics in LML. So we're still using the LML schema to represent these. And now we have actions, which are the transitions. So all this is using the same LML ontology that everyone's used to using, but now you can see and visualize a state machine diagram right within Innoslate. So let's flip to the physical model now that we've looked at our functional model. Let's look at an internal block diagram. So using the internal block diagram is really easy. You just drag your block over from the side and then drop it, and that'll add a new block for you. So it's really, really easy to get an internal block diagram generated just like you would an asset diagram today. And as we mentioned earlier, if I modify this SysML internal block diagram, it'll automatically build for me a series of LML asset diagrams, and vice versa. So once again, if you want to use LML or you want to use SysML, or part of your team wants to use one ontology and part of your team wants to use the other, you can do that, and rest assured that the model is being updated in real time, just as you're used to. So let's go ahead and flip to another SysML diagram, the block definition diagram. And this is worth mentioning that this block definition diagram, right, I didn't draw. It was automatically generated for me. Because I specified my internal block diagram, I'm automatically going to get the block definition diagram. So very, very powerful, right? I didn't have to draw this diagram from scratch. And I can also rest assured that this information is being consistent, right? Not only am I doing things quickly, but I'm also rest assured, right, that what's in the internal block diagram will be in the block definition diagram, right? So I'm reducing the amount of errors that I might have in this model. So here I can add things like a new block. I can add a port, a value, a characteristic, right? So you can see the ports that I had in the internal block diagram are all showing here. You can see my values are here. You can see a constraint. So I can click on that constraint and open up a parametric diagram. And here you can see a parametric diagram that's in Innoslate. This is showing a force equation. So here you can see F equals MA. Physicists will really love this diagram, right? A equals dV over dt. And you can see the values that are coming from the robot to be parameters into this equation. So all this, right, directly within Innoslate. So let's take a look at the SysML requirement diagram. So if we look at the requirement diagram in Innoslate, you can see that it's, in this case, a hierarchy chart showing some relationships to other actions, right? The open door and closed door actions. And here you can see this one has a relationship to the door. So I can go in here and you can see it looks like I missed the word accept here. So I can just add the word accept. And then rest assured, right, that this is going to also update requirements view. So you can see, right, it updated the requirement in real time. So very powerful, right? I can use the requirements view, or I can use the requirements diagram, or I could use the hierarchy chart, right, from right within Innoslate, and rest assured that my entire model is going to be updated in real time. So really neat. Let's take a look at the search system. So since we've covered a lot of different diagrams, let's use the search system to try to find different things, right? So let's do a query like is_orphan. And if you remember from my talk earlier, is_orphan will find you entities that have no other relationships, right? So 2 of those are reports, and that probably makes sense. But 2 others are entities that I probably will want to delete in this case, right? These are entities that looks like I made, but I didn't need. So this is a great way to kind of go in your model and find entities that you probably don't need anymore. Let's do a number wildcard search. This has been a very common customer request for the last couple of versions. So now I can do something like number:(a.4.star). And look, it found everything that was under A.4. So a very powerful way to find everything under a specific hierarchy. I can do diagram searches, so I can do something like diagram LML action, and that will find me all my action diagrams, right? So these were the 2 action diagrams that we looked at earlier. I can do attribute.duration less than 1, and that will find me all actions where their duration is less than 1 hour. I can also do greater than 1, right, and find actions where their duration is greater than 1. So a very powerful way to search for entities and retrieve them from right within Innoslate. So that shows you a lot of the new updates we have and where you will see the changes and how they will benefit you. Now we will take some time for questions.
Thank you for the live demonstration, Chris. Chris will now answer your questions. We've already received several questions. If you haven't done so, please send your questions through the panel on the right. If we can't get to all questions, we will be happy to contact you after the webinar. Our first question that we've received is, the diagrams look very similar to SySML diagrams, but there appears to be some differences. Have these diagrams been verified against the SySML standard?
We've done our own internal verification with SySML. We're still in beta right now with this current version of Innoslate, so we have our own team going through and making sure for quality assurance to make sure that they're verified. So the answer is yes, they will be verified to SySML standard.
Our next question, what do you mean by biodirectionality? In UML, SysML, they do not have the direction.
Well, it depends what you mean by bidirectionality. So between LML and SysML, we mean the fact that the diagram, if you build a SysML diagram, we're automatically updating the schema, and then that will automatically generate for you other diagrams. So that's not a SysML feature, but that's a feature of Innoslate, and we're still maintaining, once again, the SysML accuracy.
Our next question is, can I use the search engine while I'm trying to add a relationship from within an entity?
Yes, you can. So the new search engine works directly with an entity view, so you can use that number:(a.4.star) right within entity view.
Our next question, does the Innoslate GUI allow me to just start drawing diagrams, or do I have to create some type of other entity to which I attach diagrams?
You right now use database view to build an entity, or you can use the dashboard to create a diagram directly from the dashboard. So there's 2 ways to do it. You can either create an entity, or if you want to just start with a diagram, you can use the dashboard to do that.
Our next question, do the new diagrams allow me to show the multiplicity on the links?
Yes, they do.
Do you support SysML full and proxy ports, conjugated ports?
We support, for the exact details on that, we'll answer that question over email.
Our next question is there more detailed documentation, or does the tool walk you through the import better?
There is more detailed documentation, and the new import wizard will walk you through each step. So it's an and. We have a whole new set of documentation that will be published at the same time of this release. We've added, I don't know, over 100 pages, I think, of new documentation with this release. And, of course, the import analyzer, as everyone saw, right, is now a wizard. So it walks you through the steps a lot better.
Our next question, does the SDK include an API for manipulating SysML blocks and connections?
Yes, but you will use the LML schema to do that.
Can the new search engine be used from within diagrams?
Yes. In the existing tab, inside all the diagrams, you can use that to query right there.
Do you have to start from the sequence diagram in SysML, or can you start with an activity diagram and get the sequence diagram for free?
You can start with an activity diagram and then get the sequence diagram for free. As long as you put the object nodes on there, it'll automatically generate for you the sequence diagram.
The sequence diagram seems to only allow for instantaneous processing. It does not seem to allow for processing that takes time to complete. Is there a way to show one of the swim lanes take time to complete an activity?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if the SysML specification really has a concept of time either in the sequence diagram. So I mean, the sequence diagram is not really designed for time, although in the new sequence diagram we're using actions on there, so you could put the time there, and then the activity diagram, right, would have those durations, and the simulator will execute them. So you could specify the durations within the sequence diagram now, because of the way we're using it.
When will the new version be released?
We're expecting a mid-March release of this.
Do all of the actions and assets have history now?
Yes.
Is Innoslate SysML 1.3 compliant?
We've implemented most of the SysML features, although I'm sure there are certain things in SysML that are not here. What we've done is we've tried to make it so, right, we've tried to build the easiest to use implementation of SysML possible. So you'll probably find most people will not even notice there's probably a couple things that are not here that the SysML specification supports, but we tried to build the easiest to use tool possible here.
Is the user guide updated to reflect the new features?
The user guide will be updated when Innoslate is released. We currently have the user guide updated, but it hasn't been pushed out to production until the release is published.
How many of the new functions are available in the free version of Innoslate available to academia?
All the new features except the SDK, unless we've given you a waiver, are available to academia. So the only feature we currently don't allow academia to use is the SDK unless you have a waiver, which you just have to email support and ask for access to the SDK.
When I change one diagram, what happens to the others?
If you change one diagram, it'll update all the other ones in real time. So if I, of course, change the name of one diagram, it'll update all the other diagrams. If I, build a sequence diagram and add a new action on the end, it'll add the new action on the activity diagram.
Are all the SysML diagrams interactive?
Yes. You can edit all the SysML diagrams directly within Innoslate, just like all the LML diagrams.
If I use SysML diagrams, how does that affect the LML diagrams?
If you use SysML diagrams, it'll just update the LML action diagram, LML diagrams in real time, just like it has in the past with the other LML diagrams.
You say you are using LML primarily. How hard was it to develop the SysML diagrams?
It was actually pretty easy. We've only added 2 new classes to Innoslate, the equation class, and then what's the other class? The port class. The port class. The equation and the port class are the only 2 classes we've added to Innoslate. That's it. I mean, the rest of it was pre-planned before Innoslate was ever released to the public.
We have time for about one more question. How complex can I make my search for entities in the database?
So you can do ands and ors and nested expressions. So I can search for something like number :A.4 and is orphan and an or, and I mean you can do it's pretty much limitless. And then if there's some query you imagine that you can't do with that language, of course the SDK allows you to do a whole lot more. So whatever you can do in Java, you can do with the SDK.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. If you still have questions, please reach out to us after the webinar. If we did not get to any of your questions, we will contact you. We would like to thank you again for joining us today. As a reminder, we will be following up with you very soon to send you a link to the recording and the presentation slide deck. We would also like to invite you to our next webinar, Practical DODAF, on March 24th. So be sure to check your email for the invitation. We also encourage you to visit our website as well as connect with us on social media. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you again for your attendance, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar in March. Please enjoy the rest of your